Where are you, Carl?
I'm in my kitchen. Sorry, is the stupid question, Vu, but I live just outside London.
Ah,
We are now.
I think we are live and streaming. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Creating the Future's community meeting, board meeting for whatever month this is, whatever week this is. The quarantine version, the social distancing version of Creating the Future's meeting. Let's go around and just introduce ourselves and where you are, maybe what the weather's like, and how are you experiencing life these days? We don't even need to go to awesomes, just whatever is coming up for you. I will start. I'm Hildy Gottlieb. I am in Tucson, Arizona, where it is, we are facing a heat wave. I think, Elizabeth, you guys are in heat wave as well in LA. We are supposed to hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 38-ish Celsius this week, which is easily a month early for that. And so that's weather. I will share once Dimitri and I get going, we'll share what's going on over here. But who wants to be next up? Carl, you want to go, and then you can go back to your chicken?
Okay, I'll go next, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Wilding. I'm Creating the Future's European Outpost. I'm just outside London, in England, in a place called St Albans. Weather here currently is raining, but we've had glorious sunshine for the last few days, which I don't know if that's made the lock-in worse or better. Life here is pretty strange at the minute. I think we're about 6 weeks into the lockdown now, and we are just at the point in the lockdown where people are starting to sort of, I guess, ask serious questions about how much longer can this go on for, not just because of the economic damage, but because I think we're all sort of a bit sort of stir crazy, is my guess at the minute. And it's not very clear what the next steps are for us at the minute, which is probably not helping us as a whole. But broadly speaking, I think we're doing okay. But across the country, I mean, you are seeing signs of stress in some quite unsavory ways, which I'm sure you're all familiar with.
In thinking about you and the role that NCBO is playing, and just holding the space for the whole sector, which is huge. While everybody's personally struggling, you guys are really holding the space for the whole sector there. So thank you for that. Who's up next?
I'll hop on since I'm already unmuted, and then I'll mute myself. I'm Elizabeth Sadlon. I'm outside Los Angeles, and yes, it was pretty warm over the last couple of days, but right now it's a beautiful, beautiful morning, and the windows are open, the fan is going, and I am just so fortunate. I have a beautiful little office in the backyard where I can always physically distance and hope to socially connect and stay connected. I'm feeling really isolated from the community in general, and not being able to practice the proximity that I like to do. And I'm feeling over the last couple of weeks that I've been seeing and sensing the focus on pivoting to the future and really figuring out the longer term implications and actions we can be taking now and preparing for where we're headed, and not accepting anything like going back to normal. And I knew this was the place and the people that I wanted to be with to think about that. So thank you for what I said, Hildy, can I join you on Monday? So that's why I'm here. Thank you all for being together.
Yay. Awesome. Yes, absolutely.
I'll go next. I think I join after in this order. So hello, everyone. I'm Angie Ikeberry, and I am the, I guess, Midwest representative in Nebraska here. And the weather is amazingly nice out, and for better or for worse, we've never officially had to stay in our houses and be in lockdown. We've been self-isolating for many, many weeks now. I've lost track, but But we're able to get out and ride our bikes and so on when the weather is decent. So that's been nice. But of course, with our governor not requiring lockdown, we are one of the states that looks like it's going to be, a long time before we kind of come out of this. Though our university just announced that they're planning to go back to in-person classes in the fall, which opens up all sorts of, on the one hand, some nice, like, okay, we can start planning for that. But on the other hand, also a little bit terrifying to figure out how that will work. And especially as somebody who represents faculty for the union, thinking about how we make sure faculty have choices around that. And of course, thinking about students and their safety and so on. So anyway, interesting times, but also opportunities to maybe rethink things, which I think, hopefully we're going to do.
Wonderful. Wow. Talking about who you're holding the space for. That's just tremendous. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. So like the three left are all like remotely or intimately related to union work. So pick one by marriage, by past, by.
I'll jump in. This is Justin Pollock in Washington, D.C., and we are experiencing a cold wave. So it's been rather April-y, showery, and unseasonably cold,
Wow.
which, I guess to Carl's point, it's the antithesis, which is it keeps you inside a little bit. But when you are self-quarantining, you have a rainy day and you're like, well, what are we going to do today? It's like, but some of the things, that are going on for me, on the personal front, I am loving that my children are actually outside riding their bikes because there's nothing else for them to do. And there is this experience of freedom that they actually didn't have prior to this. So that is my constant silver lining, is that kids are being kids. Even with everything around the anxiety that they experience, there is still just go out and play and like find something to entertain yourself with. I don't care if it sticks cans, it has wheels or whatever, just go do it. So that's been fun. And the other thing, for those of you who know me, I love the fact that there is no assumption that has any validity right now, other than people are people. And so it is just this, fun little experiment that every day it's like, well, that might not be true. Let's think about let's just think, and let's actually ask the questions, like what are we assuming, and what do we need to think about differently, and what do we just need to think about? And again, for those of you who know me, that's like, that's Disneyland for Justin. So I'm appreciative.
You're not closed.
We
Yeah.
are open.
Yes. Yeah, you're the open Disneyland.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's all I got for now.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Vu.
Hi everyone, it's Vu. Here I'm in Seattle, where it is nice and sunny. And I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, so they cannot be left unsupervised for more than 5 minutes at a time without them burning the house down, or worse, drawing on the walls. It's like worse. And so it's been a little challenging. I'm feeling a little more on edge, and I have been channeling this energy to just burning bridges left and right with foundations. And so I'm pretty sure Open Society hates my guts by now. So.
And you're doing something right.
So calling out people who are just doing terrible things is kind of what I've been trying to do. And there's just way too much BS in this sector that we just have to call out and get people to get over. So it's a good opportunity for us to do that. So Yeah.
Seems like a very productive outlet for your anxiety. Benefiting all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea. Last year we had a snowstorm and people were stuck indoors for 5 whole days and parents were going crazy. And now it's like day 43 in Seattle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'm hoping that all of you your families are safe and healthy, and I know Seattle was so hard hit. Yeah. So Dimitri, so before you get started, I just pulled up 2 things that Lizzie sent me that I'm going to share with you guys. Is the oatmeal. I can handle being tired and I can handle being full of anxious energy. What I cannot handle, the thing I cannot bear is being both at the same time, all the time, which is welcome to all of us. And then the other one, which I particularly loved, was this one. Are you drinking wine at 11 a.m.? That's quarantine, baby. Where are your pants? That's quarantine, baby. This is your second panic attack in a week. That's quarantine, baby. Yeah, so we're all sort of living that's quarantine, baby. So Dimitri, I will mute and you can share what's going on with you.
Obviously sharing a lot of what the sort of common themes in my mind is life goes on regardless of all of this. There's things, be they 4 and 7-year-olds, to keep them from, you know, painting the walls and writing. We've been dealing with here just internally for the last few days. We had a geyser water leak that happened, fortunately, while I was standing right next to you know, scrambled for 20 minutes to try to find where the shutoff was, because it was in the meter things full of dirt, and had to dig it out and find it, and finally got it off. Bottom line is the house is, and the water pipes are all galvanized metal, galvanized pipe, and they are corroding. It looks like, and it's like, ooh, are we showering and drinking that? And, so that's in our future of just changing out all those.
It's not in our future, it's right now.
I mean, I had to give us an estimate, had a couple come last week, give us estimates. But you know, they don't have to do it with copper pipe. They've got these great flex lines that they can, you know, and I have to dig through walls and do a variety of things. So it's been, you know, a long time. So glad we weren't on the road somewhere when this happened. You know, that, like I said, standing literally right next to it. And, you know, just sort of looking forward, actually looking forward to that, because that will create a sense of, yeah, because we've always had kind of in the back of our minds, oh God, the pipes are so old in this house, and you know, anything could happen. So that's been a lot of what we've been dealing with. I've been also using this time to do a lot of riding on my bike. So you know, virtually every day I do, you know, it's been very meditative and calming, and also get to catch up on a lot of audiobooks that while writing. And yeah, just want to leave with, I'm feeling optimistic actually, that is a potential pivot point for our society, you know, world society. Look at things through a different lens, and that, you know, things aren't continuing the way I don't know for sure, but there's an opportunity to do what VU is doing. You know, it's like, yeah,
Put
pay,
there.
pay attention here. You know, what are you doing? And there's reflection. Hopefully, this is something that can lead to a positive world for labor unions, for people who are struggling in all realms. I'm feeling a little optimistic, which seems counterintuitive, but that's what this is bringing out in me.
I am in charge of anxiety in our house. Dimitri's in charge of the plumbing. I'm in charge of the nervous breakdowns. I think you guys know that I began this with 36 hours in airplanes going nowhere fast. I had a keynote in Orlando, maybe the 9th or so, I don't remember, of March. I left here at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, the 7th. My connection was in Atlanta. I learned when I got off the plane in Atlanta that there was an email while I was in flight that the conference had been canceled. Tried to turn around and come home at that very moment, went to the Delta desk and said, can I just turn around and go back to Tucson? And they, of course, said, yes, absolutely. That will be $600. So I completed the flight to Orlando. Thank goodness arrived before the bar closed. And by 11 o'clock the next night, 36 hours later, I was home. That began the adventure. You know, it's just been the same up and down as everybody. And the thing that I'm realizing personally is I have zero resilience and no bag from which to recover. So it doesn't matter how big or how small something is, it's all worthy of falling apart because there's nothing there. And so yeah, there's good days where it's like, yes, and I can get work done, and then there's days curled up on the couch. And the pipes, Dimitri, I will tend a little bit more to drama than Dimitri does. This was a geyser. I could send you guys the video. This was a geyser out of a 2-inch gash in the pipe at the point where, I mean, the plumber was concerned he wasn't going to be able to patch it because it's so close to the wall of the house. And this geyser went off for 20 minutes until Dimitri could finally figure out, because they've changed stuff in the meter box and so yeah, in the middle of all of this, we are having to replumb the entire house, cut through the walls in here, all while I'm preparing to do a virtual keynote for the conference I didn't attend in Orlando. That's Wednesday. It's like everything is brain churning. Everything feels huge. And so that's sort of where I'm at. I am blessed to have a house over my roof over our heads, to be quarantined with somebody I actually like, you know, that we are healthy, that our families are healthy. I mean, like the big things are there. And there's a lot of, at least for me, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of learning a lot about myself and how we respond. And you know, after getting back from Orlando, I don't know if any of you have seen the piece that I wrote at LinkedIn. I think it's called basically Why You're Not Thinking Clearly. It's the brain science of how we're all reacting and why our brains aren't working. And you know, the nice news is it's got over 2,000 views. It's being shared like crazy. People, every one of the comments is, wow, this is finally calming me. I'm finally understanding. biologically what's going on. But the reality is that even those of us who understand biologically what's going on, doesn't mean we can control it. You know, it's all happening at that point in the brain that we have no control over. It's the reflexive part. It's the part that suddenly you have no idea why, but your hands are shaking. And we're all there. And the one thing I'm seeing, in addition to, and you know, we're going to talk a lot today about what's next. You know, one thing we know about crisis, and we see it every time, we see it in earthquakes, we see it in everything, is people rise to the occasion. People feel that overwhelming sense of connection and kindness and compassion. And I remember during the massive earthquakes in Christchurch, one of the questions that one of our fellows, Garth, asked me to help them address was, what does it take to continue to feel this sense of kindness after everybody goes back to normal? We're feeling such compassion. Everyone is contributing who they are and what they have. What does it take for us to not go back to the way it was? And because all of our systems, unfortunately, are set up based on what was, that's where we go. You know, individuals will go where systems lead them. That's where we go. And so I'm, you know, in the middle of all of this, feeling that sense of opportunity that all of you are talking about, that we can't go back, feeling the role that creating the future has the unique, if nothing else, opportunity to play in. Our name is creating the future. You know, I've been writing a lot about what does it take to create a future different from our past. And we have a way of doing that. We have a framework for that. That alone sent me into a panic 2-3 weeks ago to realize, this is the time for us to step into doing. And it was like, I can't step into this. I can't figure out how to get out of bed and brush my teeth in the morning. So, so yeah, that's a lot of what's been going on around here. Is the same thing that's going on everywhere, except we have water everywhere.
And we're in the middle of the desert too, so.
Yeah. So, so yeah, you know, I am deeply grateful that the man next to me in a room that looks nothing like our room, Dimitri, good job, understands plumbing, can talk to plumbers, because I'd be like, yeah. So that's our story here. Anything fun and awesome going on in anybody's life? Something neat that has happened? I'm going to share a neat thing. I think you guys have seen pictures that years ago, I set upon a project to make the whole front border of our house wine bottles. And so you dig a trench, you put the wine bottles upside down, and the beautiful glass tops about, you know, the bottom of the wine bottle is what sticks up, and that's formed the border around our house. And it's really pretty when the light shines through, and made sure they were all different colors. This year I set upon an art project that I'd started a while ago, but definitely this was a quarantine thing, of finding all kinds of little toys like race cars and dinosaurs and zebras, and epoxying them to the wine bottles. And what has been delightful, because everybody's out, everybody's walking, everybody's biking, is there are little kids who, when they walk by the house, they have to get out of the stroller and they have to touch every toy. And they look at every toy, and I'm getting to know the moms, because they, and you know, moms are like, don't touch them. I'm like, no, touch them. And if it comes off, that means I didn't glue it enough. So that's my, and it has been so darling. And yesterday I was looking out the window, and this woman had this little dog, and she had, you know, a long leash, those retractable leashes. And she was up ahead by the driveway already. the dog stopped at every one with the toys, because you know those little kids have had their grimy hands. Oh, they must have smelled so good. So I'm getting to watch little babies and dogs stop at all the toys, and they have to squat down and they have to play. And sometimes I'll hear the mom say, "So what does the car say?" And you hear this 18-month-old go vroom, vroom. So that has been joyful.
So I just want to add to that, that this morning.
Let's switch over.
Our kitchen window looks out the front yard. You see the bottom, see everything else. This morning, two women who were probably in their 70s were walking down the street, looked at every single one. So it's like the entire age spectrum is so intrigued by the little model. So I thought that was kind of cool.
It has been fun. Any of you doing fun projects while you're starting something, trying something, or just trying to survive?
We're having a major games competition at our house. So every night, a different game. It's like a tournament, basically. And last night, I whooped everybody's butt in Monopoly. That was pretty exciting. And, you know, I don't know what we're going to play tonight. Every night it's a surprise. My daughter's in charge of the competition, but we're just, you know, keeping track of who's in first, second, and third. And,
That sounds great.
so it's been fun. We've been doing that. Yeah. And watching a lot of theater, like especially the National Theater has their streaming plays going on, and the Globe. So each night we also are, you know, doing some kind of looking at things that we wouldn't be able to see, you know, if we weren't in this situation, I guess.
Yeah. If you have any favorites that you've watched, stick them in the chat. I'd love to.
Okay. All right. I'll do that.
Yep. Anybody else? Elizabeth, is Allie's not home, is she? Where is she?
She's home.
We're all here. So
You're all here.
I've got a 16 about to turn 17-year-old. So Carl and whoever else just had a birthday can teach me how to do good at-home birthdays. And 16 about to be 17-year-old and a 21-year-old who is graduating while she's here from college and cooking up a storm. So that makes me super happy, and lots of games here too. I'm always at the bottom of the list if we were keeping track of who's winning, but I'm at the top of the list of heart filled with joy of all of that. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome, 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 awesome. Well, and a big, we missed Justin's birthday last month, but a big happy birthday to you, to Carl. We will spare you singing unless unless everyone feels inclined. No, please don't. I beg of you. Oh gosh.
I think Happy Birthday must be the most humanizing song because no one can sing it on key. So it's like, let's make everybody do this all the time.
Yeah.
You're only allowed to sing Happy Birthday to me if you're washing your hands at the same time.
We could all do that. I think we've all gotten good at doing everything while washing our hands. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Yeah, so the planning for what's next thing. One of the things that I realized in getting ready for our time together today is that our timing as a board is actually perfect for what we're about to step into, because I want to share a little bit about what we've been thinking about, and some of us have been talking about in terms of what's next. And this body, having determined that the role is to make sure that we're walking our talk with integrity, that we're walking the talk of our values, that we're walking the talk of catalytic thinking and action. The time for that is going to be right now. Because as we're stepping into what's next, the question is going to be, what does it take for us to ensure that we're walking that talk with integrity and that we're stepping in with integrity with our values? So let me just give you guys, I will spitball a little bit and just share what we've been thinking about. And I know I've shared a little bit of this with several of you, so if it's redundant, it's redundant. This year's plan had been to put all the final conditions in place so that 2021, we could step into what's next for creating the future, to scale from what has been proof of concept for the past several years to now scaling and saying, okay, we've proven this concept. What does it take to scale what we've learned globally to actually create the kinds of systems change that we know is possible? And the importance of systems change, especially as we're thinking about it right now. And so what the pieces that we were going to be putting into place so that January 1, 2021, we're ready. Spring into action, because all those pieces have been put in place. One is to do final adjustments on the whole ecosystem shared decision-making platform that we've evolved over the past several years of what is creating the future organizationally. Get the board all set in place, have our bylaws, have rhythms, so that when we're about to step into what's next, that's pretty well defined, and we know exactly what we need to put in place. Secondly, has been this whole piece that I've been talking about a lot and been having conversations with a lot about exactly what Vu is talking about. We can't keep going the way we're going, even before COVID. Let's pretend this never happened, because this was going to be the plan. Many of you have seen the slide share that I did of what I'm affectionately calling the Sisyphus project, which is working in social change. We shouldn't all have to feel like we're constantly trying to push that boulder up the hill and all it's doing is rolling down, because social change systems are so not aligned with what we're all trying to accomplish. And so really the whole piece of, again, laying the groundwork for that, having more conversations so that we can sort of determine what is our role in advocating for that significant systems change across the sector. And sector very loosely, social change, wherever it happens. And then the third piece was, if we are going to have our mission really scale out to, I hate the word scale, ripple out to what it has the potential to accomplish, we can't be the only ones teaching catalytic thinking. There needs to be hundreds and thousands of organizations teaching this as part of what they do. So whether that is nonprofit resource centers or NCVO or academic institutions, it can't just be an us thing. This has to be shared, and especially the tools for teaching it have to be shared. So what does it take to do a webinar if you are a nonprofit resource center in X community? What does it take to teach a workshop? But again, it needs to ripple out if it's going to have any impact. And that was the plan for this year, is we were going to put all the pieces in place so that January 1, we can pull teams together and get to work. Yeah. What has become very clear is that people want to know right now, how do you plan for what's next when there is no that's the way we did it to touch back to? It's not even we don't want to go back to, because that's a huge piece of it. And we're all sensing, and I'm watching foundation leaders really struggle with how do we A, provide some overhead now for what people need, and B, what the hell is next? And so I'm watching that, but the other reality is that this is the first time in humanity's history that A, it's everyone, it's the whole world, and B, there's no this is how we did it last time to touch back to. The whole world is shut down, and that's never happened. So we don't have well, last time we did, which means that in terms of creating the future, this is what we do. We encourage people to envision a future that's not like the past. All of our tools, all of our frameworks are about creating a future aligned with the values that everybody is espousing now when they're saying we don't want to go back. I started penning a piece last week, and the first words in it are, we can't go back. And that's the battle cry we're hearing from absolutely everyone. So now suddenly we're in this place where everything that we were going to put into place slowly and calmly at a human pace this year to be ready January of next year, it's all right now. It's all right now. And been having conversations with many of the people who've been very active in making things happen at Creating the Future. Talking about things like finding partners, because clearly we need to find partners. We need to find partners who will immediately bring catalytic thinking into their work, envisioning what would be possible if all the major foundations were putting catalytic thinking into their planning and helping their communities and grantees put catalytic thinking into action so that they actually could plan comfortably and calmly for the future without feeling like they're having to predict and step into the unknown. Looking at what is it going to take to build out this infrastructure, build out a faculty, build out, I mean, this is dollars. This is our going from the proof of concept budget of $12.37 to, you know, it could be 2 million, it could be 3 million. And what does it take to scale that? What are the budgets needed? What are the approaches needed? Again, that fit with our values. And looking at doing a collective enoughness effort as part of that, to share things that people can share, like IT support maybe, or bookkeeping support, things that organizations already have, to be able to say, we're going, and again, modeling what collective enoughness looks like in action by our actually doing the campaign very publicly. And so pulling all of these pieces together, while all of our brains are going, I don't remember how to brush my teeth. But that's the reality where we're at. And so the thing that's become very, very clear to me is that this is the point for the board to be able to say, as we are pulling together these plans, pulling together, there's both the planning piece, the you know, what will this thing be, and how will we corral it, and some of the tasks, and we've got people who can do the tasks. The place for the board, though, is going to be, what does it look like? What do you guys want to do in terms of this new role of ensuring that all of our conversations are being led with integrity, all of our planning is being led with integrity to our values, walking the talk of what we want to see in the world, looking at all of that systems change that, Vu, you talk about so much, and we have been pushing for and trying to frame, what does it look like if we're walking the talk of that? If we're not just going out into the world and saying, y'all must, but actually saying, yeah, we're gonna. And what does that look like? So, yeah, that's sort of my long winding intro. Let's just start with, you know, what's popping for you guys as I'm rambling here. And then let's sort of see where it goes.
So one of the things that I've been really kind of churning around, and as you were talking, Hildy, it made me think about, you know, people will follow systems. And so, you know, I think for many of us, that Sisyphean feeling was, you know, the system that kept saying, we could never do that, that could never happen, that's impossible, you know, in terms of giant system change. And now we have the giant system. It's like, actually, you can shut down the world. Guess what? And as tragic as this is, it's like not everything stops. Like, you know, life doesn't stop, and people have an opportunity. But I do feel this real tension. You know, let me step back. When we were in that situation, we were fighting systems that were rooted in stability, meaning that they, you know, everyone's desire to be stable, and even if the stability was inequitable, it was stable and it was established. We still have that tension of stability systems versus, I don't even know what the sort of other side is, but more aspirational and equitable systems that we know are, we knew before we're going to create some disequilibrium for folks. But it was really hard to imagine it for a lot of people because it was so counter to the stability-based systems. I guess part of my concern right now is, now that people feel the disequilibrium, how quickly are they going to gravitate back to those systems of stability and just, you know, just grabbing onto them with every fiber? And the example I think about is actually the stock market. I'm like, it is unbelievable that the stock market thinks that there's an economy that's in line with what has been. But if you look at the stock market, it's indicating that all of those forces are pretty confident that they're going to realign whatever comes out of this to exactly the old system. They're gonna rebuild it. You know, everyone in the way be damned. And so that's, I mean, that's part of the urgency I feel, is the notion of giving people a tool to figure out how they can feel more secure and stable, even in situations that feel less predictable or less less known for there. So I definitely feel that sense of urgency, and also trying to figure like how, or what does it look like to capture the fact that, you know, that everyone's assumptions are being challenged. Like, I open this by saying it's so exciting, but I also see just a tremendous amount of fear. And I also, maybe it's because I'm here in Washington, DC, and part of what I see, this glint in people's eyes of like, we can remake this even more of what it was than what it could be. And that also really scares me, because so many resources are going to stabilizing people's lives. And in the background, I mean, in the background, what is the US government doing? Like, you know, shattering regulations, and nobody even knows, you know, nobody knows what the other, you know, the Democratic Party is doing. Nobody knows, you know, not that I have as much faith in that institution either. But I don't know, those are the things that are popping for me, and really thinking about what is the continual megaphone or amplifier that says thinking is okay right now. Because I feel like that's the big thing for me, is that we've had all these systems that basically said thinking is not okay. Tell me the best practice, tell me what's worked. And we basically did everything to remove thinking. I'll stop there. Sorry, that was my little diatribe.
That's great. It's great. It's great. And what's popping for me as you're talking about it is the need for this wonderful tool that we have developed, which is called the Continuum of Potential, which is around meeting people where they are and understanding where people are at different points, because there are people who are really scared right now and just want the how-to of how to cope or how to go back to what was normal. And there's the people who are saying, this is the opportunity to grab for what's next, and to not conflate those, but to understand that everybody's at a different point. And some of us at different days are at different points, and to be mindful of that, and compassionate about it. Yeah. Yeah, Carl.
This is fascinating. I guess I saw something on Twitter the other day from a guy here in the UK called Jeff Mulgan, who said that there's an awful lot of what you might call COVID confirmation bias going on at the moment, where You have lots of public intellectuals who are setting out that this is how the world is going to change, and that COVID proves essentially what they thought before the crisis came along. So I would like to say to you that, I mean, this massive outpouring of community spirit and volunteering that I'm seeing in this country, that this is going to continue sort of long afterwards, because I am biased towards feeling that people care about each other and they care about their communities. But I think I would be making a profound mistake if I just assumed that that this is going to carry on. So following on perhaps from Justin's thinking, and indeed from everything that you tell us, it's now more than ever that we not just challenge the systems that we're talking about, but we challenge ourselves and we challenge our own internal biases, because there is no guarantee that this crisis is going to recreate our world in a way that we just happen to want it to be. So, I mean, the fact that you can go into the city at the moment and you can see the other end of the city because it's not covered in smog doesn't mean, does it, that that's necessarily going to sort of carry on. I guess my sort of other sort of thinking at the minute, and I sort of put this down in the chat already, is that for me, when both you and Justin are talking about thinking at the moment, it's more critical, I think, than ever that we don't just try and imagine what the scenarios are of what the future looks like. Partly because some of those scenarios we don't like, and we've got to think about how to stop those happening, as well as how we create the ones that we do want to happen. I think it's probably more important than ever now that we set out our vision as civil society of what a good society sort of looks like. And you know, it's really interesting hearing Justin talk about that stability that existed before. I think lots of people would argue actually the system that we had before was inherently unstable, and that, you know, I mean, especially since the 2008 crisis, that actually society has sort of been hanging on by its fingertips. You know, the rise of sort of even greater levels of inequality, what's happening in terms of climate change. You know, we've all got our story to tell, haven't we? So I think we've not only got the thinking to do about that good society, but I think as all of us do in our different ways, we've got that storytelling to do about what's emerging and what the good society looks like. Because as human beings, we need narrative and stories. We don't just need data and analysis. And it's really important as we come through this crisis that we tell the stories of what communities did together in the hope that we might retain some of that going forward.
Beautiful, beautiful, yeah. What else is popping for y'all?
I just want to dovetail on Carl, that Carl, you're absolutely right. It wasn't stable for many, that it was the powerful that it was stable for. So I'll clarify that.
Well, and we all, it was the way it was. So even if it wasn't, you know, I scribbled down what you said, Justin, is even if it was bad, it was stable. So the unsustainability, I knew what to expect. I knew if I was poor, if I was living in crisis, but the rest of us didn't, you know, that was never stable. That's never stable. But for the vast majority of us, we could kid ourselves that it was stable. It's over there. It's not happening here. Yeah, there's. And I really do harken, I really do harken back, Carl, to as you're talking, to that question that, and it happens every time there's a crisis. Like I said, you know, Garth asked me in Christchurch 10, 12 years ago, how do we ensure that we maintain this? And the opportunity I'm seeing right now is, I don't know. I'll stop talking. I'm babbling.
I guess just one final thing, as you are thinking, I really like Justin's way of sort of saying like stability versus sort of remaking, and I guess I'd sort of slightly phrase it differently and say that, you know, if there's one end of the continuum that's remaking and it's a vision for a different society, at the other end of the continuum, everything that I've read about crises is that the biggest crises accelerate trends that were already there. So the stability that's at the other end of the continuum won't be stability, it will be an acceleration of the bad things that we knew already.
That's already happening. It's already happening. What all have you guys been thinking about, if you have been, about the role of creating the future in creating the future?
Well, we had talked, Hildy, you and I and Lynette met, and by the way, I think, yeah, Lynette's going to be following up with you at some point soon about that. But you know, we had talked about how creating the future can, you know, work with organizations like Arnova to think about how to be sort of, yeah, thinking of the future, creating the future for their around sort of at the organizational level. And it seems like also at the individual level, there's opportunities here. I think these bigger, like really big structural issues we need to be thinking about, but it, you know, it's so overwhelming. But thinking about the individual and the organizational level seems much more like, okay, we can really create some change in these more sort of micro places that might add up to something broader. I mean, I'm just thinking about, one of the things I was thinking about as we were talking about all this is, on the one hand, I've really struggled with, oh, here's an opportunity to maybe really, you know, jump in and try to create some big change in this area, at the same time that I'm just like struggling to, you know, kind of keep it together every day. And, you know, like just, I got a delivery of a case of toilet paper today, and it was like the most amazing, like, okay, I don't have to worry about that now for a little while. So, you know, like even just these individual helping individuals figure out ways to be okay to then be able to make that, you know, these smaller changes might be somewhere to start.
You know, it's the interesting part about the brain science is that the reality is our brains are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. First and foremost is survive. And our brains are also wired to use as little energy as possible, which is why we make such snap assumptions and judgments, because we've created shortcuts. Our brain creates shortcuts. And once it learns something like that person is a jerk, or, I mean, you know, all of those things that the brain learns, it just repeats that. So that you may learn that person is the nicest person in the world and they were just having a crappy day, but it takes years for you to get beyond that person is a jerk. And what's happened with COVID is that none of our reflexes, we're having to think about everything. So where if you needed toilet paper, you just went to the store. I mean, all of those things that you'd never even think about. You'd be like, I'll be right back, honey. I'm just gonna go get every single thing in our lives we have to think about now. So what our brains are doing, in addition to working in fear, which cuts off our access to our ability to think clearly anyway, is everything is requiring that we think. So at the same time, cortisol is cutting off our access to the frontal lobe, so we can't think, and everything requires that we think. So, and we wonder why something big coming in, you know, Angie, to your point, when several of us were talking about what's next, and it became clear that what's next is big for creating the future, I curled up on the couch for 2 days. It's like, I don't have room for this. I can't even figure out where to go buy lettuce, and now I got to think about the future of the world. So yeah, it's the big stuff. The fun part, you see, and the fun part for me is the big stuff. Is you know, Vu's been poking the bear, and poking the bear is where it's fun.
Hey everyone, I do think that we have maybe some opportunity to prevent people from learning the wrong lessons, because this is really critical. And as you mentioned, the confirmation biases and other things, is that I'm really afraid that people are going to be like, yeah, this is, and then it's just, they learn the wrong lessons, then we go back Right now, there are a few examples of this really terrible stuff. Some foundations are doubling down on just some of the entrenched terrible practices that they have, while others are actually doing amazing work at changing their practices. And we have some countries like Hungary becoming more like a dictator because of this crisis. And I'm afraid that like our government will become even more authoritarian, and that's what happened with 9/11 when we gave up a whole bunch of liberties, and that is what's going to happen here, and I think it's going to happen in the sector. So thinking of it as like not necessarily what do we do to create the future, but like how to prevent a crappier future from happening. It's like we're time travelers here, and what do we need to do? And it might be some of the things that you're doing, Hildy, which is writing. Maybe we need to think about partnering with SSIR for a 5-part series on horrible lessons we should not be learning, or something because of this. I do think it'll be a good opportunity for us to think about becoming more vocal for the sector. And that means, of course, I am biased because that's what I've been doing, is writing about stuff and pretending that I'm really smart. And, I mean, that's unfortunately, as Justin said, that we don't think anymore, and people don't do critical thinking anymore. And sometimes it's the opposite. We do a lot of intellectualizing and thinking that we're doing critical thinking. And so maybe we gotta figure out like how do we actually get creating the future sort of messages out there, like a series of important key lessons we need to learn. Like what Carl mentioned about confirmation bias, that's a great article to put out there. Just from this conversation alone, we have several different things to talk about, and it'll be helpful for the sector to challenge a lot of existing assumptions and kind of divert people. It's kind of like the meta thinking that we need to do. It might be one of our roles. I also do think when you're talking about rippling, is we do have this sort of like conundrum about how do we get funding when so much of the funding dynamics and foundation power dynamics and stuff are contrary to what we're trying to do. So that's another issue, is it does take a lot of resources to ripple outward. And maybe we do need to think about, okay, there are some foundations, the ones that are changing their practices are the ones we need to reach out and say, look, we are sounding the alarm that if we don't do something now, we don't stop this train from moving forward, then after the pandemic settles down, it's going to be awful. And we need you to help us kind of divert that by putting ideas out into the sector that are going to stop some of this horrible thinking that's out there. And we need $5 million to do it.
Carl.
So I'm fascinated by what Vu just said. And I'm just thinking about the fact that in my own organization, where we are in desperate trouble, to be blunt. We've lost 40% of our income overnight. And but also the sector is in desperate trouble. So we have completely pivoted away from every plan that we had. And I know we've got lots of sort of thinking about how foundations behave, and we've never approached them, so on. But I almost wonder then, if you pivot all the plans for about training and extending the knowledge in that way, and you take what Vu's just said and you go to some of the foundations and say, we are going to be a radical think tank for a year that is going to just think the unthinkable because no one else will at this time, and just give us support. And then at the end of this, using the lessons learned, we will spread those out, and then we will pivot back to what we were doing.
Yeah, and in my mind, it doesn't have to be an either or. In my mind, it doesn't have to be an either or. I think both are so critical right now. Yeah.
I take the point, Hildy, about it doesn't have to be an either or, but can I challenge you gently on that? And maybe it does, because I think we are at a point in time where we have to make choices. And we as a board, one of our bad habits is that we try to boil the ocean every time we do anything. And I would actually rather do a small number of things and do them really, really well. And it strikes me that you have and the people that you gather around you, you have the ability to think some of these things through in a way that no one else does. And that strikes me as a far more valuable commodity at this point in time than maybe some of the practice stuff.
Awesome. Justin?
So one of those ideas, so Vu, one of the things I love about reading your stuff is that you really bring values up to the surface, but without really calling it, I mean, you call them out, but you sort of either talk about the values that we're aspiring to, or oftentimes like, what does this practice actually say about people and what we believe? And so as I think about, sort of that call to, what are the habits, what are the things that we want to avoid? It is that the separation that we've had of decisions and values, and that thinking and values that we, people always sort of soft pedal values and kind of put, it's like, oh, put them up on the wall. I don't know what they'll do over there, but they'll do something. But it really does, so much of what we're talking about is, that core element of catalytic thinking, which is what are the values that are required to get to the kind of thing that we want, whatever it is. And, what does it look like to really push hard on values-based decision-making and thinking? Like saying, sorry, you cannot think about something without asking, what are the values embedded in this thinking? I mean, because, again, going back to all the earlier stability conversation, we settled on so many systems, particularly in our country, that are so disadvantageous to people because it felt like no one called out the values. No one said, do you realize what this is going to do to certain people? Do you realize what this is going to allow others to do? Is it, and elevating that conversation, really putting it first and foremost to say, the first gate you have to go through for any kind of thinking or decision making is values. And it is like the secret weapon that we are going to wield to puncture. I mean, that's so much of what I see you doing, Vu, is it's like you have this like Excalibur of values. I mean, that's what you're really poking the bear with, is you're not saying, I think the system, like it's not even the system you're talking about. You're like, what does this system do to people and how people care and think and behave and how they're impacted, which is totally a values thing. And like to Carl's point of like, if we can elevate a basis for that, where we figure out how do we help people stay true to values, articulate values, how we give people permission to call out values, and give it weight. I mean, and I do often think about the examples that we so often run into when we're thinking using the model, which is you get to a decision point and it's like there's no decision anymore. As soon as you say, well, what did we say the values were? What did we say was important? What did we say it was going to take? And suddenly you're not having to make a difficult decision. It doesn't mean that the implementation isn't hard. It doesn't mean that the consequences of the decision aren't insignificant, but the actual making of the decision is like it's done. Or it can't be done in that way if we're going to be holding an integrity. And since we talk so much about this notion of integrity board, like we made the assumption that, well, part of that is we are always making sure that we are true to our values. And perhaps part of the integrity is making sure that we don't ever talk about anything without bringing to the surface that it has to be a values conversation first.
It's a big piece of why I was looking forward to today. The plans that we step into are going to evolve. A team who understands our internal capacity, to accomplish anything, will gather. There'll be, for lack of a better term, a steering committee of people with brilliant talents coming together to say, okay, here's a plan that makes sense given our capacities for moving forward. And it may be that we choose one avenue over another. The most important thing in my mind is exactly what y'all have been talking about, which is this is the time for the board to step in and say, okay, what will it take to ensure that whatever this thing is that we move forward on is walking the talk of our values at every point. And the piece for me that is especially important here is the doing piece. We've done the thinking. We know what the board wants to be about is ensuring the values and ensuring the integrity. What is that going to look like in a week when we have a meeting to start pulling this thing together? Who is going to be there? What is that going to, I mean, I'm really looking at because part of what happens in these settings, and I'll tell you honestly, one of the reasons that I've been sort of excited for this conversation in these settings, when there's lots of people with lots of practical experience of creating relationships with foundations, or creating budgets for $1 million organizations, or whatever. We spent 3 months last year developing a communications plan with lots of communications experts of what kinds of things do we want to do to communicate, what catalytic thinking, all of the doing stuff. What I wind up being is the holder of the values, while participating, while being the one that's got to decide, okay, do I have time for this? Do I have time for that? And the thing that's exciting for me is to have now a board that it's the board's job. I can step back from that. There's this entity who has decided this is how we're going to make sure that our values are front and center in this real thing that we're about to step into. That it's not, we're just going to assume it's Hildy's job and I'm the holder of the values while facilitating a meeting and while doing everything else and thinking with my other hat saying, how am I going to get all of that done? What is the board actually going to do as this entity that is about holding our integrity? What does that look like in this action, in this planning that we're about to step into?
So it seems to me we were talking about the planning for the planning, or actually just doing something. And I'm wondering, so when I was listening to Vu and Carl, I was thinking, right now we need to do something, which is maybe some kind of, and Justin as well, around values of having some series of conversations around basically key issues, or however you want to describe it, to talk about how we, really challenge ourselves as individuals, as organizations, in responding to this current situation. And that needs to happen right away. It needs to happen now while we're in the middle of this, which is, I guess, different than, maybe those kinds of conversations could be also helping facilitate us thinking about where Creating the Future goes. But yeah, I'll stop.
So I'm involved in various, and indeed I'm going to be involved in various sort of difficult decisions in coming weeks and months, as everyone who runs a nonprofit is at the moment. And we come under all sorts of sort of opposing paradoxical pressures as to how to sort of make decisions. And it strikes me there's all manner of textbooks and handbooks out there that are about management and sort of making decisions. But in as much as I'm trying to do this well at the moment, and I'm not saying I am doing it well, I am trying to do what Justin has said, and I'm trying to think about what are the values that I want to sort of guide me through this. And you know, I mean, if you sort of force me to sort of sum them up and sort of boil them down to one line, it's that I want to be able to look everyone in the face afterwards and say, yeah, I did that. So I did that right. I tried to do it as well as I could. and I didn't sort of like self-deal or anything like that. So again, I will come back to the fact that what the value that you bring, that you've always brought for me, is that you do that sort of thinking about how we behave, how we do things, not just what do we do. And I think you underestimate how wide those values and how wide that thinking is about how we do things. And being that North Star for the non-profit sector, I think that is where you add most value. And then when I sort of think about what VU does, for example, it's almost like these are spokes going off your hub, because VU is taking essentially some of your thinking, or sorry, he's adding to your thinking is probably a better expression, and he's applying it specifically to foundations. Justin quite frequently in the past has talked specifically about infrastructure organizations. I think you know what, I think we all collectively know what those values are already. It's about getting that out and putting that out in a language and reminding people at the point of maximum duress that they are in, that the only thing that will get you through are those values.
Let's make the assumption that that happens. Let's make the assumption that over the next couple of months, that is the action that we decide to take. Right now, we are at a point where we need to simultaneously build out this organization, because what is becoming clear is this has always been more than the job of the small handful of volunteers working on stipends that are doing, and that was before. Now all of those individuals are maxed out brain-wise, and if we are going to grow any of these efforts, including what we're talking about here, is going to take more than who we have right now. The piece that will have to happen simultaneously is the piece around funding, is the piece around finding the partners and funding. And my very specific question is around, yep, it is real easy to say, yes, we need to write a whole series of things on values. We need to be leading the charge on value. That, you know, the doing actions, ideas for actions are easy to come by. This is what I think we should do. This is what I think we should do. And it's very easy. It's why catalytic thinking moves away from idea-driven strategy to causality-driven strategy. Where do we want to be, and what will it take for us to get there? The key piece in my mind is, if we're going to move forward and we are going to start looking at building out the infrastructure that supports all of this, because quite honestly, I'll be very, very honest, living in fear that there is a disease out there that if I get it and I die, what is going to happen to this thing? Because there's no infrastructure. So at a point where really looking at the infrastructure and looking at what is it going to take to fund that in a way that adheres to our values, I keep coming back to, yeah, okay, what if we, I have been writing, I've actually got a suggestion out to Stanford Social Innovation Review on a piece. If all of that is in place, and we still need this infrastructure, what is going to keep the activities towards building that infrastructure and getting the funding, what is going to keep that adhering to our values? If it's not me. If it's a system, we're always looking at what are the systems that can replace an individual? What is the system, as the board has talked about, being an integrity body? And one of the things that I want to sort of observe is how easy it is to talk about walking the talk of values, and how easy it is to reflect on, that doesn't feel right, that feels a little off, and how different and how easy it is to come up with a million ideas about how others could do values kinds of things. We're talking right now about, how are we going to do that? What does it look like for us to be the monitors of the values of this organization? Let's say it's 2 years from now and we've got 50 employees all over the world. trying to do different things. What does it look like? And we right now have this opportunity to say, here's the systems we want to put in place so that the board ensures that values are at the core of our work, not it's a project to write about values so others will do it, which is a lot of what I'm hearing. What are we going to do right now to ensure systematically, not, well, you know, somebody, Hildy's always there or whatever, but what will we do right now to create a system that right now will guide our stepping into conversations with foundations, 2 years from now will guide our programs. What are we going to do as a board to be that nexus of integrity and values? What will that look like? What systems will we build? And I'm sorry for my passion. This is very, very, very integral to where I am living right now.
Hey everyone,
So
it's Julian. Apologies, Carl. I know you have to leave and you are so generous with your time staying with us. Please feel free to eat if you need to right now. I do think actually maybe I'm rambling a little bit, but like in some ways over here, we're working on a project called community-centric fundraising, because I feel like the way we do fundraising in the sector is awful. It is terrible. It is full of saviorism and poverty tourism and so on. And so for the past 2 years in parallel, we've been trying to launch this sort of movement. And the team had this conversation that in many ways was triggered by you, Hildy, in your article about founding movements or organizations. And because of that article and our thinking about it, the group decided we are going to be a movement. And it's been like 2 years just scrambling, because movements are just way harder to fund for than organizations. And actually, the last couple of months, we got more clarity and just said, we are going to be a movement. This is what we're hoping to do. We're hoping that more and more people will be bought into this sort of community-centric sort of model of doing fundraising. And here are some values and some principles. And you know, fundraising should be grounded in racial equity and addressing slavery and injustice. These are like really radical ideas in many ways. And we approached our very first foundation a while ago. And I think there's some interesting lessons to be learned. A couple of the foundations are just doing exactly what we thought they would do, which is like, oh, well, this is very interesting. You have a logic model and a theory of change. And is this scalable? And we don't like your 2-page concept paper. There's not a chart on it or whatever it was. It was just bullshit that we've been so used to. And I was just so frustrated at it. And just like, we're trying to change the entire sector in a way it's doing something. And I get frustrated because people are like, Vu, we love what you're writing and you're amazing. And we've known you for 12 years. And I'm like, can you give me $20,000 to launch this movement? They're like, I don't know. Like, is this provable? Is this scalable? Stuff like this is why progressives are like so screwed up, because conservatives don't think about this. You know, if Sean Hannity or Piers Morgan, whatever came up was like, hey, I have a great idea that would own the libs, and you know, can you give $5 million? They're like, we don't care what your idea is. Just here's $5 million, right? And over here, so we're fighting against this like constant intellectualizing here as what we're doing, which is exhausting. It is really, really exhausting. And I've been really exhausted. But we approach one organization, one foundation who is just like, this is very interesting. And also it's been, so many organizations are facing crises and we're a health organization. We're focused on health. But we like what you do and this is great. Within a week, they gave us $50,000. They're like, you know, we love that you're challenging something. And even though we're focused on health outcomes and all this stuff, this is really important. We want to be supportive of you. And we also want to think about how do we engage with your movement to help train some of our grantees to do fundraising differently, where it ends the Hunger Games. And it's been very encouraging to me. And I think what I'm saying is, I do think that there are foundations out there. And if we want this to be a movement that's reaching, then let's make it a movement. Let's learn from Black Lives Matter and Occupy Wall Street and others, and actually start thinking about having chapters that are out there, you know, so we got funding. Community-centric fundraising is going to be launched in a couple, because of this funding, we're able to hire a website designer. I'm setting aside money to actually have people, especially people of color, think about fundraising and writing about it. And we're going to pay them a small, like $250 per article, but we set aside for like 50 articles for this next year. And then we're hoping to have like a guide where people in different cities can have chapters where they're exploring different ways, so that it's not just the central group doing this. We quoted your article on like, why is this a movement page? And actually listed out like all the different objectives that you listed, and just saying, this is why we're doing it this way. So, well, I should have told you this earlier when we were doing this, but so I do think that it's taking effect. What you're doing is making a difference out there already. And if we want to expand this and ripple this forward, then I think we should go ahead and think about, okay, what does this actually look like? And it is possibly a multi-pronged approach. It could be what Carl is thinking, which is we focus on one targeted approach and do a really good job at that. And then we just need to be bold and ambitious and go into foundations, write our 2-page concept paper, asking for $500,000 to start with, and then just go and approach the foundations. This is something that I have had some experience with that I can help out with. And although on the other hand, some foundations really hate my guts right now. So
well, what they're going to do if we go talk with them, and much of what we're seeing, and again, it's fitting with our values over the past several years, has been that we're not going to go into the competitive grant arena. We just won't, because we so deeply believe that it is harmful. We're not going to go into a competitive grant arena. We're not going to fill out your forms. We're going to build a relationship, and that will be, well, my guess is anyone that we will start talking to is going to say, you sound a lot like that Voulet guy, and we don't like him. And so that'll be okay. If we're associated with the work you're doing, I'm good with that. And again, I really don't see that at this point in the conversation that it needs to be an either or. You can always narrow down. If you narrow down in the beginning, you're not going to go wider. I mean, this is again what we've learned with catalytic thinking, is that you start with the big thinking, and it has got to go from big to smaller, because it will naturally go smaller. If we start by saying, here's all we're going to do, that's all we're going to do. And we have this wonderful opportunity. I do know that once we start writing and sharing more, which is actually the plan. I was writing last week. People are going to be asking, okay, how can I learn this? How can I learn to do this? How can I learn more about this? It's having those pieces into place and putting all of that into place to anticipate that once you start talking, people are going to say, okay, what can I do? Because otherwise it becomes them just venerating, oh yeah, that's great, without having the thing that says, and here's what you can do right now, that actually models what we want to see in others. Not, we can't do it until we have funding, we can't do it until whatever. But again, looking at, and thank you, and I would love to talk with you about building those relationships. That would be awesome, because you've already built so many of those relationships. In terms of, and I know I keep coming back to it, and it's going to just be a drumbeat because it seems to be the sticking point of what do you want it to look like when the board is doing its job of ensuring that we're stepping into these conversations with funders, the creating of the plans. What do you want it to look like when the board is saying, yeah, this fits? How is the board going to know that? What will that look like if we're an integrity board? Because otherwise we're just getting together and spitballing ideas and which is great, and I love talking with you guys. But if we have decided that this board is about integrity and values, what is that going to look like? Yeah, Carl.
So you just use language, if this board were an integrity board. I'd like to challenge you on that gently, my friend, and say we are an integrity board.
I want to hear it. I want to hear what that's going to look like in what we're envisioning. What does that look like?
But I think it will look like in the future, if you have those 50 people, I think it will look like the board now, where we hold our meetings in open, where we argue with each other and we don't just agree with each other because we're friends, where we play the ball, not the man, to sort of use the expression, where we are open to different ideas and different ways of doing things. Where we are not self-dealing and proposing ways forward that are just about making us look better and so on. And actually, I think where I might gently challenge you on the foundations thing as well is that for me, an integrity board is also one that recognizes that sometimes the best way that we can help the people that we want to help is that we have to engage with the world as it is, not the world that we want it to be right now. So I take the point about the way that those foundations encourage the sort of the starvation cycle, the Hunger Games or whatever, but sometimes I sort of think that the only way that you can influence those organizations is by engaging with them. If we are only in the outside of the tent all the time, you know, sometimes I think we have to take some steps inside the tent. And again, this is, I think what I'm sort of trying to say here is that for me, I think we could maintain our integrity if we said at times we might make a decision to sort of do something with a foundation where they want their quarterly returns or whatever, because I would hold my integrity if I felt that we use that money, A, to sort of support the work that we've been talking about today, but B, because by directly sort of working with that foundation, you have much more access to them and you can change their thinking and their behavior. And then that might be one of the ways that you change them.
I'm gonna remind all of us of decisions we made almost a year ago, is that this board will no longer be a decision-making body. This board will no longer be making suggestions and ideas and decisions. The decision that we made, that was the last one, is that decisions will be made by the people doing the work closest to the work, and that the board's job will be to ensure that they are doing that with integrity, with the board making no decisions and not advising on programs or advising on direction. That was what we came to at least over a year ago. We've had all those conversations with the folks from Inspiral talking about what does it look like when the board is not making decisions, is not making suggestions, but is just ensuring that the people who are making the decisions are doing so with integrity, which is what brings me back to asking, what does that look like? So we have a team that has been getting together, looking at the strategy, looking at what's possible, looking at what's going forward, making those decisions. What does it look like when the board is the body who is saying, is asking questions perhaps around, does this have integrity? Integrity to what? What does that look like when we are not making decisions as a board? We're just making sure that those decisions that are being made are walking our talk.
Do we have any staff though, Hilly?
Nope. Got me and Dimitri.
Okay, that's
And so what we're looking at is significantly increasing that, among other things.
right, because it seems like that model works great, because I also hate meddling boards who come in and tell staff what to do. At the same time, we don't have any staff. So in some ways, we are the staff if we want to get stuff done.
Well, right now, the way that we are functioning is basically a team of volunteers, some of whom are getting stipends. And again, in the early days, that works. In startup, that works. If we're going to create the ripples that we need to create, we need peeps. We need peeps getting real salary and real paid and having real roles and real jobs. And again, that's a big piece of this infrastructure. Even if that was the only thing we were looking to fund, again, what is this body's role in making sure that's done with integrity? What does that look like?
Well, that integrity component to me is one of reflection at this point, because I think if you're not having a board that is making decisions, so because there's a whole set of integrity models that are built into the decision making, I think what we have is a body that is more reflective and inquisitive to being able to look at the body of work that is out there to ask the question of in what ways does that align with the mission aspirations? So whatever that kind of strategy component is, you know, without the sort of to Vu's point around a meddling board, and this is that balance, which is we have to be able to ask questions of, tell me what's going on and what's sort of the basis for doing that. Does that align with my understanding of what the values are and the aspirations of the organization are? Because I think that where we run into the problems is, I don't think that's the best way to do that. Spoken from somebody who has no idea what the best way to do that is. I mean, that's a traditional board. So I think to step away from that is to be able to reflect on and have the system for reflecting on, you know, similar to what you said, Hildy, which was, you know, this strategy of working with intermediary organizations to find a way for them to be able to be the ripples, because it was 10 years and spreading, like the value was spreading. I think for us to be able to reflect and say, yes, that seems in alignment, and you know, on the front end, basically giving a nod, and on the back end saying, is it working? If we're putting time and energy and assets, and I don't mean money assets, because we're not even talking about that, but time, energy, relationships, if we're putting them to use, what are the needles that we see moving? Is it more entities trying it? Is it more references to it? Is it more people jumping up and down? You know, whatever it is that we, I think, you know, that's to me always been that fiduciary role is one of just making sure that the decisions are being made about the resources to benefit of the beneficiaries. In this case, it's the world for us. But I think that's honestly, that's what it is. I think that we can't get into the, well, what are we actually doing and what are our suggestions of what should be done? It is, I think, just coming back to a reflection on the body of work. And I do think that there is a space for this body, just because we are all curious, that the natural curiosity generates ideas, just like this conversation, which was, what would it look like to do X or Y? And I appreciate it doesn't need to be either or. And I appreciate Carl sort of saying, what would it look like to focus in? And I think for us, it's just to say, you know, is there anything about focusing that is, you know, in opposition to our values? Is there anything in trying to hold the space for multiple fronts in opposition to our values? Or we do have to ask the question of, you know, what's sustainable, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, for folks, financially, to that point, which is if we're too broad and it means we're not able to support, then I think as the integrity board, we would say, we're not comfortable with that. We're not going to tell you how to fix it per se, but we're going to say we're not comfortable with that. Whomever is the think force around that, please have them, you know,
Yes.
engage in this, because I think that that's the risk we run into, is that we really are we're the flag waver. We're the ones who our job is to not sit on judgment, but sit in inquiry of, does it reflect? Does it reflect? Do we think it
here's
reflects?
what's popping for me as you, and I'm sorry, I know I'm interrupting you, but my brain is just going. What are the points that this board would want to know? What are the questions? So that, again, we're creating systems so that as decisions are being made, it could be that there's always a board member when decisions are made, monitoring to just sort of say, how does this fit with our values? How does this fit with our, it could be everything from that to, here's a checklist that the board has created of the kinds of questions that relate to our values that we want to make sure in every decision that's being made, those decisions are included. Oh, okay, we talked about, is this stretching us too far, too thin? Is this fitting with our fiduciary obligations in terms of finance? Is this walking the talk of exit? I'm sort of seeing all of those, or what are the key questions, those key indicators? Maybe that is where we need to be looking at, what are we building?
Going to jump in there and say bye to everyone. See you all soon.
Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful dinner, and just be well. Be well.
Carl, take care.
Hey, Carl, thanks for
everyone.
hanging in there this long. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Happy birthday,
Bye.
Carl.
Happy
I also-
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Birthday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go off too because I have another meeting that's gonna start pretty soon. But
Reflections and thoughts.
I just wanted to say, like, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with the way that we're talking about the board, in that I thought we had gotten to a place where we were talking about the board actually being, you know, everybody who's participating in a way, right? So the board is active in the work of the organization, as well as other people being, we as whatever we call us, is active in the organization in different ways. We probably all can't do everything, but to be like, we're starting to set up this scenario again where we're off on the side, sort of, you know, creating check boxes, saying, you know, blessing things or not. And like, I think I would like us to go back to sort of the previous conversations we've had about, we're active and involved in what's going on with the organization. And it might be that we divvy up different, you know, areas based on our knowledge, experiences, expertise. So there's a mapping out of maybe the different processes of the organization and how each of us can be involved in different ways, maybe as a way to move forward.
I like
I'm sorry that I have to leave.
I'm sorry you have to leave, because this is injecting really good stuff.
Yeah, I like to do that. I like to, I'm just dropping the mic now. And so, all right, I'm sorry. See you guys later.
Thank you.
Bye, Jack.
Bye-bye, Angie. Yeah, and you know, some of that, I love the everybody active in the organization in ways that make sense for them, is an individual board member thing. As a body, what is the role of this thing that is this body that it, not what is the role? Role is sort of that meta discussion. What are the activities of this body that is in charge of ensuring the organization is walking its talk? And as individual board members, having we're community members, so we're all participating in ways that make sense to us. As a body, though, as an integrity body, what does this board do? What does that body do? If we were to recruit all of us, roll off the board, it's 10 years from now, we are someplace else, and there is a whole new body. What does that body do, and what are we telling them they do? Which is interesting, because that's where this conversation started 5 years ago. when we went to recruit and reinvented everything.
Hey everyone, I'm rambling again because it's Monday and I stay up late writing. I do think that maybe we need to come back to this fundamental question of like, are we trying to form a movement or an organization, which is something that I read by a brilliant person named Hildy Gottlieb a while ago. And I think in some ways we're kind of wavering there because if we're talking about staff and how many people we need to hire and stuff, and that goes back into forming an organization versus sort of movements. Or we should think about some sort of hybrid or something. And again, I'm just kind of going back to what we are learning at community-centric fundraising because so many of it came from what we read from you. And it's that there is this sort of weird hybrid of staff and board, and we decided that we are not going to hire any full-time staff at community-centric fundraising, ever. And that means that board members have to step in and do a bunch of work, including the fundraising and maintaining the website and everything. But people do get paid. We just like, we're board members and we get paid per hour as like consultants to kind of do this work because we're taking on staff role and responsibilities. And of course, our fiscal sponsor is like, what the hell? That's weird. And we're like, well, that's what's working for us because we don't want to hire any staff and have those weird dynamics anymore. So I think the point I would say is like, what are we trying to be a movement, an organization, or a hybrid? Because that might help to kind of help us to think about what do we need to do moving forward.
When we looked at this over the past several years, it was what we came to was a hybrid. And seeing the need, the question that was sort of guiding us was, what do people need organizations for anyway? Why don't a bunch of people just go out and do stuff? And frequently a bunch of people go out and do stuff. And sometimes it builds into a movement. And sometimes, even if you look at the civil rights movement, there were organizations within that movement that made things happen. And so when we looked at that, we said, well, what people need organizations for is they need resources and they need each other. That's generally why I don't go out and just start my own, I'm going to feed people. I need resources and I need other people who are either care about this or I can learn from, and et cetera. And it's why when we played with the design of this as a hybrid, it was, what does an organization look like that is movement-like, that accomplishes what a movement accomplishes? And we had decided that our role was to make sure that anybody who is doing work that would accomplish our mission, which is that systems change mission, that sharing people how you can change systems you find yourself in by using catalytic thinking. That the main thing that this organization would do is to support people who want to do that, who are already doing that. So Vu, you're already doing work, making sure that there is a place where you could learn more about what could be effective, that if you wanted to, we might be a fiscal sponsor, we might be, but what are the things that people need if they're out there doing this work out in the world, to again, create those ripples. And in looking at that, it made it, we didn't need a lot of staff. We just needed to be able to support the work that others were doing. And not make the decision about what work they should be doing, but if you're doing something that seems to align, then what can we do? What support do you need? Could be guidance, it could be here's ways of partnering, et cetera, it could be the values. But it really was with that eye of, okay, if this is a hybrid, that means that it is movement-like, it adheres to all of those check boxes in the article that you've referenced, and thank you for telling me. And it's going to need some staff. So for instance, right now I'm doing the bookkeeping. We need a bookkeeper. Sharing bookkeeping. Again, that collective enoughness piece. We need IT support, okay? Contributing the IT support. Somebody will be doing that. It could be as contractors, and it could be as shared, and it could be as staff, without necessarily defining that, but that's part of what we're hoping to accomplish over the next several months, is to figure that out. What does that look like, and what will we do to get that support? But it is very much looking in that hybrid mode of, it doesn't have to be the way everybody has thought it would be. Yeah, Justin. And one more thing, hold your thought. One more piece of that is that if the job of the organization is to support folks doing work that furthers the mission, that the board is a support to that, not the dictator of that. And so that was where that whole conversation was. If the board is a support, what does that look like? Go ahead, Justin. I'm sorry.
It's okay. This goes a little bit back, Vu, to your question, and other places where I struggle, which is, we always think about the organization as a thing, but like if we go back to its root, organizing, really, if we think about the organization actually as a strategy for rallying assets, that's what it really is. If we accept that, and I think, Vu, what you described with the entity that you're involved in is saying, the point here is to organize assets in a way that works. We don't care about the traditional structures or mandates of what a thing that we call an organization is. What we are actually building is an organizing strategy for organizing resources and assets. And I do think that that's really kind of that umbrella of creating the future, which is the hybrid, which is to say some of those resources are the tactical, the mechanical, the theoretical components that Hildy you bring, and the support, Dimitri, that you infuse, and those are critical assets to just the mission and being able to do it. Sort of with that, and actually when Angie was raising her question, I make a big distinction between an organization's approach and its strategy. Its strategy really is like, what are we going to do, and what does it take to do that? The approach is actually the design and philosophical thinking. It is, we believe this is how shit happens. And so we're going to organize the organization in alignment with that. As I think about an integrity board, and I actually think this is true of all entities and all organizations, that's where I think the board's focus is if we think about the board as this governing entity, it's really caretakers of the approach. What is the approach that the organization is engaged in? Well, we don't necessarily know, so we are dependent on whatever nodes are out there that are part of creating the future. This entity has to somehow learn, what are you doing, and what's the rationale behind that? Just help give me some context. And then really, like, not to, again, I want to be very cautious. It's not to stand up on high, but it's to just ask the question, does that align with what we thought it takes? Does it have the values embedded in it? Is it, really, that's actually the bulk of it. But I think it's holding that space again, which says, my job is to try and understand the approach, try and understand what it is that we're trying to ripple, and then simply ask, what does it look like right now that's doing? Then that's again, and I try and make this really, perhaps it's an unrealistic demarcation, but like, that's the board, the entity of the board. When we come together and have to do that, that's really the only question we're sort of exploring is, does the approach still have integrity? Does the approach have efficacy? And are the things we're doing in alignment with the approach? If we then choose that somehow we also want to play a role as an asset and supporter of the organization, that is separate from that. It might be that I'm one of the nodes out here that's teaching, or I might be a node that's writing, or I might be, you know, marching down the street with signs.
I'd
Or
pay to see that.
yeah. But I think that's where we like it, and I understand what you're asking, which is what does that look like to just sort of focus in on the integrity of the approach. But again, I feel like the only way to really do it is to just have opportunities where this collection of people are able to ask what's going on, or we dance in the space of the approach. That is some of what we do, which is, do we think it works? I mean, that's what this initial conversation today was all about, which is how do we think the world is changing, which might dictate how an approach might need to change, which is fundamental to what we're doing. But really what we're just doing is saying, does the approach need to be massaged? And then, and to be perfectly honest, there are right now, there are only a few pieces that we're actually looking at to say, are they in alignment with the approach? Because that explosion hasn't happened. So
Well,
those are my thoughts.
No, and they're wonderful. Here's where it led me, is that there's an approach to monitoring the approach. And that is, does the board monitor that in advance or in arrears? So if decisions are being made ongoing throughout the month, if teams are getting together, doing work throughout the month, is it only at the end of a month that the board comes together as a body and says, so what'd you do? Well, we're not entirely sure that decision that you made 3 weeks ago and already started taking action on is in alignment. Or are there mechanisms the board wants to institute to ensure in advance that the decisions are being made in alignment, so that when the board gets together, that discussion is very, very different. But isn't it in advance or is it in arrears? And I would hope that it would be in advance. And what does that look like? But that suddenly just clicked for me when you were talking, Justin, so thank you. And we're at 5 minutes.
So I think it's in advance when there is questions around building an approach with efficacy. So when there's hypotheticals around what could this look like, that's
What do you mean by building it with efficacy?
I mean, basically saying, you know, when we gut check that against the world and what we think it takes to create change or to create, does that fit? Like that is that's a lot of the catalytic thinking when we're moving to a space that's unknown.
Okay.
or something that's not. I think it's in arrears when there is operational elements going on in alignment with that. Like, so when we're checking alignment, that is in arrears. But I also think that this is where the power dynamic needs to shift, which is the only thing that we can do is say, that doesn't comport to us. We are raising that flag. We are asking that something happen that either, you know, changes our approach, like changes our concept of what the approach was that we're aligning with, or perhaps it is something that says, not sure that feels quite sustainable. Help me understand more, because that's where I think that we run into the problem, is that boards think they should fix problems. And at this point, or not even problems, but just incongruence. And I think our job in arrears is to say, that feels incongruent. Kind of end the story, because we're not the experts to figure out the congruency. And we also have to be open to say, I might be misunderstanding something, which is why I think it's incongruent. I now need to learn more about it that's there. I mean, there's a humility in this that we just have to give permission to say, the best we can do is give you our gut response, and it's got no power. It really doesn't. It is purely you know, I think just as Carl said, we can protest, we can voice ourselves, but we have to recognize that, like, we have to put the power and the potential of creating the alignment in the hands of people who know how to do it best.
I think
And
that's-
then there were 4.
I know, Elizabeth sent me a text, and before I could say I'd like your reflections, she was gone. In terms of reflection, I can't believe we let our brains do what they did today. So I want to honor everybody who was here, because for people whose brains are like going, that sounds like tinfoil going, that's pretty amazing. I am feeling very excited at the thought of the individual talents in this room being part of this, and taking you all up on your offers to be part of this. And I'm also very much looking forward to, what's popping for me is that the systems we create are going to be created while we're going to create the path while we're walking it. That if the drumbeat in our planning is constantly, we're going to ask 6 times during this meeting, where does this align with our values? How do we get what will it take for this to be adhering to our values? What are our values? What do our values look like in action in this conversation? I think we'll create the systems. What's very, very clear to me today is that I don't think we can create the systems in advance of. I think we're going to be saying, oh, this is something that this is a question that keeps coming up. This is one that we're going to want to monitor. This is one that we're going to want when a team out in wherever is doing whatever, and they're going to make a decision, and they want to make sure in advance that it adheres to the values, that A, they're using catalytic thinking in doing so, and B, here's 3 questions, values-based questions that have been routinely used. I think those are going to evolve. It's becoming clear that we can't in advance figure out what those questions are going to be. Maybe we can, but that it will be easier to do if we build the path while we're walking it. That's just sort of what's standing out to me from this conversation, which has been mind-bending, as they frequently are, and my excitement at what we're about to step into. What all is standing out to you guys? And my deep gratitude that everybody was here. I miss you guys.
Everyone, I have to run as well for another meeting. I don't know. I think we need to just give ourselves a little bit of grace at this moment, because we're not thinking clearly, as you mentioned, Hildy, and there's just so much going on right now. And I know it's not catalytic to think about survival. And at the same time, I'm just overwhelmed with just so many things going on. I mean, I'm just thinking about what we're not thinking about, just like the after effect of the pandemic and the recession and the massive starvation globally that will happen. And it's just way too much at this time. And I don't know, maybe it's okay for us to let ourselves percolate on things and then check back in a month when hopefully things will settle down a little bit.
Thank you. Justin, how about you?
So I think to Vu's point, it feels it feels like a luxury to be able to have this conversation, certainly. You know, these conversations usually, I talk so much because they hit such raw nerves for me. I mean, it's literally, yeah, I just get so stuck in because that's how it's supposed to be. And all of these structural things are just so embedded in that. And so, so I appreciate always the opportunity to express, although I realize sometimes it's over expressive. But yeah, I think to Vu's point around permissions, like, you know, we have to start giving ourselves permission to be in less control of things. And I think that that's part of what the pandemic is showing too, is, I mean, as awful as it is, it's like, you know what, as tragic as it is, the world does keep going on even when we're out of control. And, you know, if we can remind ourselves that the end of the world is not the end of the world, that we can actually envision it being a little bit different, and we can come out, you know, with ways that just allow us to be more forgivable to each other and less controlling, then by all means. Of course, I rant and rave with a lot of places where I want things to be a particular way. So
You should be better about not being in control. Dimitri, how about you?
A couple things have been clearly following these last few reflections. You know, what is the network that we have, and what can we create? The power of it. That one of the things that this world circumstance has created in this kind of conversation with people all over the world, you know, it's not just your clients, but it's everywhere. So that makes me reflect on the, is this a movement or an organization or a hybrid? And that some of those clearly organizational. You know, there has to be a node, you know, something that you're connecting with, you know, creating the future. There has to be some entity that makes this happen. On the other hand, there is no, I want to say, percentage in it being dictatorial that in the was, you know, in terms of organization. So I'm just sort of reflecting on walking that and tightrope, I don't think is the right description of it, but walking carefully so that you can gain and implement concepts. Clearly, a movement is what's going to change the world, not an organization. But as during other movements, there have been organizations within those or participating with those that could serve as node information. You could, you know, connect with somebody else or whatever. So I'm really reflecting on that transcendence. What transcends us, this group, and how can we, as much as that's possible to ensure, but, you know, Hilda, your question early on, what happens if, you know, the fact that we could, you know, not exist tomorrow as individuals? So if this is important and the world at all, then how do we ensure that? How do we ensure the transcendence of this? And so I'm thinking about that as well, and we're reflecting on that. Clearly, no answers. Up in my mind as we've been talking about this.
Just grateful. That's really what I'm just feeling. Grateful to all of you for caring, mostly, for being here and for stretching your brains at times when our brains are barely stretchable. But just feeling very, very grateful that we're on this path together, and that feels really good. So if you know of gods of plumbing, please pray to them right now. And I'm going to put a note out. We're supposed to meet in 2 weeks. I don't know that we need to do that, but I'll put a note out and we can talk about it. And just feeling just deep gratitude and love you guys a lot. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. A great rest of the week.
Yes.
And Merry Christmas, or whatever it is. I guess.
Whatever it is.
Whatever season, whatever day of the week, I don't know.
Happy Memorial Day. Yeah.
Well, I always know it's Monday because that's when I see Vu's posting. So
Thank you for reading, Justin. I appreciate it.
anytime.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.